My husband, the CEO, spat on my face and shoved the paper in front of me. Accept a 60% salary cut or I'll find someone who will. He humiliated me in front of his 24-year-old lover and staff. I need 20 hours, I said calm. That night I reached out to someone I never thought I would. What I did next would change everything. She actually believes she has leverage. Rebecca's voice carried through Samuel's office door as I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand inches from the handle I had been about to turn. Being the mother of his children doesn't give her special status in business decisions. Samuel's laughter followed, cold and calculating in a way I had never heard before. Olivia never understood the difference between personal relationships and strategic advantage. That's why she'll never succeed without me guiding her decisions. The coffee cup in my hand began to shake as 5 years of marriage dissolved into a conversation between two people discussing my destruction with the casual tone reserved for weather forecasts. I stepped back from the door, my heels silent on the carpeted hallway that separated executive offices from the main workspace. The coffee I had brought for Samuel, his preferred afternoon blend from the shop 3 blocks away, suddenly felt like evidence of my own naivety. How many thoughtful gestures had I made while he plotted my professional and personal downfall with his 24-year-old assistant? The conversation continued, their voices carrying through the gap beneath the door. Rebecca's tone held the confidence of someone who believed themselves unobserved, unguarded in a way that revealed authentic intentions rather than carefully constructed professional personas. The salary reduction proposal should force her resignation within 2 weeks, Rebecca continued. 60% represents sufficient financial pressure without appearing completely unreasonable to outside observers. She will either accept terms that make her position untenable or leave voluntarily, eliminating potential complications from wrongful termination claims. Samuel's response carried approval that he had never demonstrated toward my strategic recommendations during our 15-year partnership. The beauty of this approach lies in its appearance of legitimate business restructuring. Market pressures justify compensation adjustments, and her emotional response to necessary changes simply confirms her unsuitability for executive leadership during challenging periods. The clinical language they employed to discuss my destruction felt more devastating than emotional outbursts or heated arguments would have been. This was not impulsive decision-making born from frustration or temporary conflict. This represented systematic planning designed to remove me from both professional and personal aspects of Samuel's life with maximum efficiency and minimal legal exposure. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, grateful that most staff had already departed for the evening. The building's after-hours silence provided cover for eavesdropping on conversations that were reshaping my understanding of relationships I had believed were founded on mutual respect and shared objectives. The partnership agreement Samuel and I had signed 8 years ago granted equal decision-making authority and profit sharing, but legal documents appeared meaningless when one partner collaborated secretly with employees to circumvent established governance structures. "What about the girls?" Rebecca asked, her voice carrying the casual interest someone might show when discussing minor complications to travel plans. "Carol and Teresa will adjust to new circumstances," Samuel replied with the detachment he might use when discussing quarterly revenue projections. "Children demonstrate remarkable resilience when presented with clear expectations about changed family dynamics. Olivia's emotional instability during this transition period will likely reinforce their understanding that stability requires different leadership approaches." The reference to my emotional instability caused my grip on the coffee cup to tighten until my knuckles appeared white against the ceramic surface. My daughter's names spoken with such casual dismissal by their father created a rage that felt different from professional betrayal or personal disappointment. This was protective fury that mothers experience when threats to their children emerge from sources that should provide safety rather than danger. I realized that Samuel's recent behavior toward Carol and Teresa had been preparation for this moment rather than temporary distraction caused by business pressures. His reduced engagement during family dinners, his mechanical responses to their achievements, and his increasing absence from school events had been calculated emotional withdrawal designed to minimize disruption when our family structure changed according to his strategic timeline. The conversation shifted to practical matters involving asset protection and custody arrangements that confirmed the comprehensive nature of their planning. Rebecca's familiarity with legal terminology and procedural requirements suggested research extending far beyond casual consideration of potential outcomes. She spoke about prenuptial agreements, business valuation methods, and parental rights with the fluency of someone who had consulted attorneys and financial advisors to optimize Samuel's position during inevitable divorce proceedings. The Henderson account transfer should be completed by Friday, Rebecca noted, referring to our company's largest client relationship that I had developed and maintained for 3 years. Once that revenue stream is secured under the subsidiary structure, her departure becomes financially viable rather than disruptive to operations. Samuel's approval carried satisfaction that felt like betrayal multiplied exponentially. The Henderson account represented not just significant revenue but validation of strategic approaches I had advocated despite his initial skepticism. My success in developing that client relationship had restored confidence in my professional capabilities after a difficult period following Teresa's birth, when balancing motherhood with executive responsibilities had created temporary performance concerns. Now that same success was being weaponized to facilitate my removal from the company we had built together. The hallway suddenly felt airless despite the building's efficient ventilation system. I needed to leave before their meeting concluded and normal office activities resumed. Discovery of my presence would eliminate the strategic advantage that knowledge of their plans might provide, though I had not yet formulated any response to information that had fundamentally altered my understanding of my marriage, my career, and my family's future security. I walked toward the elevator with movements that felt mechanical rather than natural, my mind processing revelations that required complete reassessment of assumptions that had guided major life decisions for the past 5 years. The afternoon sunlight streaming through office windows created patterns on carpeted floors that I had traversed thousands of times during years when this building represented professional achievement and collaborative success rather than the location where my husband and his assistant had plotted my comprehensive destruction. The elevator doors closed on a world that looked identical to the one I had inhabited that morning but operated according to rules I had never understood. Samuel's systematic manipulation of business relationships, financial structures, and family dynamics revealed capabilities I had never suspected despite 15 years of intimate partnership. The man who shared my bed and claimed to love our daughters was simultaneously orchestrating events designed to leave me with no professional standing, no financial resources, and potentially limited access to children who represented the most important relationships in my life. As I descended toward the parking garage, I understood that the perfect facade of our family life had been maintained not through mutual effort but through my willingness to ignore evidence of its artificial construction. The coffee cup in my hand had grown cold, much like the marriage I now recognized as another strategic asset in Samuel's portfolio of relationships designed to serve his objectives rather than provide genuine emotional connection. The conversation I had overheard would haunt me through the sleepless night ahead, but it had also provided something unexpected. For the first time in months of growing unease about Samuel's behavior and our family's direction, I possessed concrete information about threats I was facing rather than vague suspicions about problems I could not identify. Knowledge, even devastating knowledge, created possibilities for strategic response that ignorance had never allowed. The parking garage felt like a transition space between the professional life that was ending and whatever would come next. I had entered the building that afternoon as Samuel's wife and business partner. I was leaving as his target, but I was also leaving as someone who finally understood the true nature of the conflict that had been developing around me for months without my awareness. That understanding, however painful its acquisition, represented the foundation for everything that would follow. 3 days passed before Samuel called the all-hands meeting. 3 days of normal morning routines, polite dinner conversations, and bedtime rituals that felt like elaborate theater performances designed to maintain illusions that had already shattered in that hallway outside his office. I moved through our house like an actress who had forgotten her lines, improvising responses to Carol's questions about college applications and Teresa's excitement about an upcoming soccer tournament while internally cataloging every interaction for signs of Samuel's strategic timeline. The meeting invitation arrived through our company's standard scheduling system, marked as mandatory for all staff with the clinical subject line, organizational restructuring discussion. No advance agenda. No preliminary documentation. Just 24 hours notice for what I now understood would be my public execution. I arrived at the conference room early, hoping to claim seating that might provide strategic advantage during whatever Samuel had orchestrated. The mahogany table that had hosted countless collaborative planning sessions now felt like a judicial bench arranged for pronouncing verdicts rather than facilitating discussion. 23 chairs surrounded the polished surface, each position offering different sight lines and proximity to the projection screen where Samuel typically displayed quarterly reports and strategic initiatives. Marcus entered first, his weathered face showing strain that confirmed my suspicions about advanced knowledge of the meeting's true purpose. He nodded in my direction with the careful neutrality that office veterans employed when navigating politically dangerous situations. His positioning near the far end of the table suggested deliberate distance from whatever confrontation was approaching, though his presence indicated loyalty to the company rather than personal allegiance to either Samuel or me. Rebecca arrived precisely at the scheduled start time, her timing demonstrating the calculated punctuality that had impressed Samuel during her interview process 6 months earlier. She wore a navy suit that projected professional authority while maintaining the polished appearance that had become her trademark during client presentations. Her briefcase contained documents I had not been asked to review, despite my role as co-founder requiring input on materials distributed during company-wide meetings. The remaining staff members filed in with the subdued energy that accompanies mandatory gatherings whose purpose remains unclear. Administrative assistants exchanged glances that suggested awareness of unusual circumstances, while project managers and senior consultants maintained the neutral expressions that protected careers during periods of organizational uncertainty. The room filled with the quiet tension that precedes significant announcements, though I alone understood the personal nature of the restructuring about to be announced. Samuel entered last, his timing designed to maximize impact rather than demonstrate respect for colleagues' schedules. He carried himself with the confidence that had once attracted me during our early professional relationship, back when his strategic thinking served shared objectives rather than personal advancement at my expense. The folder in his hand contained materials I recognized as salary analyses and organizational charts that had been prepared without my participation, despite contractual requirements for joint review of compensation decisions affecting executive leadership. This meeting addresses necessary adjustments to our organizational structure, Samuel began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he reserved for presentations to skeptical clients or resistant staff members. Recent market analysis indicates that maintaining current compensation levels across all executive positions threatens our competitive viability and long-term sustainability. The prepared speech demonstrated rehearsal that confirmed the systematic planning I had overheard during his private conversation with Rebecca. His language employed business terminology designed to frame personal decisions as objective market responses, creating legal protection while establishing narrative justification for actions that served his strategic purposes rather than legitimate business requirements. Rebecca leaned forward in her chair, her posture suggesting engagement that contrasted sharply with the uncomfortable stillness displayed by longer-tenured employees who understood the political implications of the discussion unfolding before them. Her notebook remained open beside carefully organized documents that supported Samuel's presentation, though her contributions had not been requested during previous organizational planning discussions that had included both founding partners. Specifically, recent performance analysis suggests that certain executive positions require compensation adjustment to reflect current market realities and individual contribution levels relative to organizational success metrics. Samuel continued, his clinical language creating emotional distance from decisions that would destroy careers and family financial security. The phrase "certain executive positions" carried obvious meaning that required no clarification for colleagues who had observed recent changes in office dynamics and decision-making authority distribution. My exclusion from client meetings, strategic planning sessions, and budget reviews had been noted by staff members who had previously sought input from both founding partners on matters affecting company direction and resource allocation. Samuel's presentation included projected cost savings and efficiency improvements that would result from organizational restructuring, though his analysis omitted discussion of potential disruption to client relationships or institutional knowledge that might be lost through executive departures. The financial modeling appeared professionally prepared, suggesting consultation with external advisors who had provided strategic guidance without my knowledge or involvement. Therefore, effective immediately, Olivia's executive compensation will be reduced by 60% to align with current market conditions and performance assessments. The words hit the conference room like physical impact, creating silence that felt dense with shock and discomfort rather than surprise. Several staff members shifted in their seats with the involuntary movements that accompany witnessing something that violates basic professional decency, though none possessed authority or inclination to challenge decisions made by the company's controlling partner. The 60% figure represented calculated precision designed to force resignation while maintaining appearance of legitimate business adjustment rather than personal vendetta. The reduction would eliminate my ability to maintain household expenses and family financial obligations, creating economic pressure that would make continued employment untenable regardless of my personal willingness to accept reduced compensation. This adjustment reflects market analysis indicating that executive compensation in our sector requires alignment with performance metrics and current economic conditions affecting consulting service demand, Samuel added, his explanation providing legal language that protected against potential discrimination claims while justifying decisions that served his strategic objectives. Rebecca's barely concealed satisfaction became visible through subtle changes in posture and facial expression that confirmed her role as architect rather than witness to the restructuring announcement. Her strategic positioning throughout the presentation demonstrated preparation that extended beyond administrative support to active collaboration in planning my professional destruction. The spit hit my cheek before conscious thought could process Samuel's movement across the conference room. The physical contact carried symbolic weight that exceeded its actual impact, representing contempt that required public demonstration rather than private expression. The moisture on my skin felt cold against the conference room's controlled climate, creating sensory memory that would persist long after the meeting concluded. "Accept the adjustment or submit your resignation," Samuel said, his voice maintaining the clinical tone that had characterized his entire presentation. "You have 20 hours to decide." 20 hours. The arbitrary timeline confirmed that my response was predetermined rather than genuinely requested, since immediate resignation would serve his purposes while negotiation or legal consultation would merely delay inevitable outcome through prolonged conflict that would damage company morale and client relationships. I stood slowly, my movements requiring conscious control to maintain dignity while 23 colleagues observed my response to public humiliation that violated every principle of professional courtesy and personal respect that had supposedly governed our marriage and business partnership. The folder containing my strategic analyses and client development materials felt heavier than usual, weighted with the realization that years of collaborative work had been transformed into evidence of my expendability. "Maybe next time you'll appreciate what you have while you still have it," Rebecca said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had anticipated this moment with malicious pleasure. Her parting comment revealed the comprehensive nature of their planning, extending beyond professional dismissal to encompass my marriage, family relationships, and financial security. The words carried layers of meaning that confirmed my destruction had been orchestrated systematically rather than arising from sudden business necessity or temporary frustration with my performance or strategic contributions. The journey from conference room to elevator required summoning composure I barely possessed while colleagues avoided eye contact that might suggest sympathy or support. The hallway felt interminable under observation from staff members who had witnessed unprecedented workplace cruelty designed to maximize psychological damage rather than achieve legitimate business objectives. The parking lot outside Teresa's soccer practice felt like neutral territory, a space where I could observe my daughter's determination on the field while processing the devastation that had unfolded in that conference room. Teresa moved across the grass with the focused intensity that reminded me of my own approach to challenging negotiations, back when I believed persistence and preparation could overcome any obstacle. Her coach called adjustments from the sideline while parents clustered near the bleachers, their conversations centered on weekend tournament schedules and college recruitment prospects rather than corporate betrayal and marital destruction. Carol sat in the passenger seat beside me, her 17-year-old frame folded into the space with practiced efficiency as she reviewed calculus homework that would have challenged me at twice her age. Her presence provided comfort that felt both natural and necessary, though I struggled to maintain the maternal composure that protected her from adult complexities she should not need to navigate. "Mom, you're gripping the steering wheel like you want to break it," Carol said without lifting her eyes from the equations that covered her notebook pages. Her observation startled me into awareness of physical tension I had not consciously recognized. My knuckles appeared white against the black leather steering wheel, creating visual evidence of internal pressure that my carefully maintained exterior was supposed to conceal. The analytical mind she had inherited from both parents allowed her to notice patterns and connections that escaped casual observation, a capability that would serve her well in whatever career she eventually chose but created challenges for maintaining family secrets during adolescence. Just thinking about work, sweetheart. Is Dad being impossible again? The question carried layers of understanding that revealed how completely our family tensions had become visible to children who possessed neither the experience nor the emotional tools to interpret adult conflicts involving systematic betrayal and calculated cruelty. Carol's use of the word again suggested that Samuel's behavior had established recognizable patterns that extended beyond recent events to encompass months or years of treatment that had damaged family relationships. It's complicated, honey. No, Mom. It's really not. Her response carried the directness that characterized her generation's approach to problems that adults complicated through denial, rationalization, or misguided attempts to protect others from uncomfortable truths. The simplicity she identified in situations I perceived as complex might reflect clearer understanding of relationship dynamics unencumbered by emotional investment that prevented objective assessment of behavioral patterns and their logical consequences. The conversation ended when Teresa's practice concluded, though Carol's observations followed me home like accusations I could not refute or dismiss. Her insights about Samuel's impossible behavior and my visible stress responses suggested that our efforts to maintain family normalcy had failed more completely than I had recognized, creating psychological burden for children who deserved protection from adult conflicts rather than front-row seats to marital dissolution. That evening, I moved through our house with heightened awareness of sounds that might indicate Samuel's location and activities. The domestic routine that had once provided comfort now felt like surveillance operation requiring careful timing to avoid confrontations that might reveal knowledge I had gained through eavesdropping on private conversations. Dinner preparation, homework supervision, and bedtime rituals proceeded normally while I cataloged every interaction for evidence of the strategic timeline that would reshape our family structure according to Samuel's preferences and Rebecca's recommendations. Samuel's study occupied the corner of our house that received afternoon sunlight through windows overlooking the garden where Carol and Teresa had played as children. The room contained furniture and decorations we had selected together during happier years when collaborative decisions reflected shared values rather than power struggles disguised as domestic negotiations. His desk held family photographs that now felt like props designed to maintain appearances rather than expressions of genuine affection for relationships he was systematically destroying. The hallway outside his study provided acoustics that carried conversations through the gap beneath his door, though approaching close enough for clear listening required careful attention to foot placement on hardwood floors that amplified sound throughout the house. I positioned myself near the wall where shadows from overhead lighting created visual camouflage while providing auditory access to discussions that were reshaping my understanding of recent events. She actually thought she had leverage, Rebecca was saying, her voice carrying the satisfaction that accompanies successful manipulation of someone whose psychology has been studied and exploited for strategic advantage. As if being the mother of his children gave her some special status in business decisions. Samuel's laughter sounded different from the warmth I remembered from our early relationship, transformed into something cold and calculating that suggested amusement derived from another person's pain rather than shared joy or mutual understanding. The man who had once celebrated my professional victories with genuine pride now found entertainment in strategies designed to eliminate my career prospects and financial independence. Olivia never understood business, Samuel replied with the dismissive tone he reserved for employees whose contributions he no longer valued. She's too emotional, too attached to fairness. That's why she'll never succeed on her own. The assessment of my character and capabilities revealed contempt that had been concealed throughout our marriage behind expressions of support and partnership that I now recognized as performance art designed to maintain domestic stability while he pursued objectives that served his individual interests rather than family welfare. Qualities I considered strengths: commitment to fairness, emotional investment in outcomes, loyalty to relationships, had been categorized as weaknesses that could be exploited for competitive advantage. Their discussion continued with details about asset protection strategies and custody arrangements that confirmed the comprehensive nature of planning that extended far beyond professional dismissal to encompass complete restructuring of our family's legal and financial foundation. Rebecca's familiarity with divorce proceedings and child custody regulations suggested research that had been conducted over months rather than weeks, indicating systematic preparation for outcomes she had helped orchestrate through strategic manipulation of Samuel's decision-making process. Sleep became impossible that night. Instead, I found myself in our home office reviewing financial documents that had been relegated to filing cabinets since Samuel had assumed primary responsibility for business record-keeping 18 months earlier. The transition from shared bookkeeping to his exclusive management had been presented as efficiency improvement that would allow me to focus on client development and strategic planning, though I now understood it as systematic exclusion from information that would have revealed his gradual theft of assets we had built together. The Henderson account files revealed the extent of deception that had supported his narrative about market pressures requiring organizational restructuring and compensation adjustments. Client correspondence showed increasing satisfaction with service quality and strategic guidance, contradicting claims about performance problems that justified reduced executive compensation. Revenue reports indicated consistent growth rather than the financial stress that would necessitate salary reductions for founding partners who had developed and maintained profitable client relationships. The discovery that every salary reduction had coincided with increases in Samuel's personal compensation eliminated any possibility that his actions reflected legitimate business necessity rather than calculated wealth transfer designed to strengthen his financial position while weakening mine. Bank statements revealed systematic movement of company funds to accounts where my signature authority had been quietly removed, creating legal structures that would leave me with no access to assets despite equal contribution to business development and client acquisition. Marcus had been leaving subtle signals about document irregularities for weeks, though his warnings had been delivered through careful language designed to protect him from retaliation while providing information that might alert me to problems requiring investigation. His weathered face had shown increasing strain during office interactions, suggesting internal conflict between loyalty to colleagues and fear of consequences that challenging Samuel's authority might produce for his own job security and financial stability. The coffee shop meeting occurred 2 days later, arranged through coded text messages that reflected our mutual understanding of surveillance risks associated with any communication that might contradict Samuel's narrative about business operations and personnel decisions. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, claiming a corner table that provided visual privacy while maintaining public setting that discouraged recording devices or aggressive confrontation if our conversation was discovered. His hands shook as he produced photocopies of transfer agreements and asset valuations that documented the systematic removal of my ownership interest from companies we had established as equal partners. The evidence confirmed suspicions that had been growing through months of gradual exclusion from strategic discussions and financial oversight. But seeing documented proof of systematic theft created emotional impact that speculation had not prepared me to handle. Marcus slid the final document across the coffee shop table with the careful precision of someone handling evidence that could destroy careers. The asset valuation report bore Samuel's signature alongside Rebecca's witness mark, confirming their collaboration extended beyond casual workplace interaction to deliberate conspiracy involving legal documentation that eliminated my ownership interest in companies bearing my name on founding articles of incorporation. The coffee between us had grown cold during our 2-hour examination of systematic theft disguised as legitimate business restructuring. "I should have acted sooner," Marcus said, his weathered hands folding the papers with movements that suggested years of handling sensitive documents while navigating political dangers inherent in corporate environments where challenging authority produced swift retaliation. But Samuel made it clear that anyone who interfered would find themselves looking for new employment without favorable references. His admission revealed the workplace intimidation that had prevented colleagues from providing warnings that might have allowed earlier intervention or strategic response to threats I had been too trusting to recognize independently. The fear in his voice reflected genuine understanding of Samuel's capacity for professional destruction, capabilities he had apparently been refining through practice on employees who possessed less legal protection than founding partners with contractual rights to company assets and decision-making authority. That evening, I sat in my car outside our house for 30 minutes before summoning courage to enter spaces that no longer felt like home but rather like enemy territory, where every conversation might be monitored and every action could be reported to Samuel through household surveillance I had never previously considered necessary to detect or prevent. The driveway that had once represented arrival at sanctuary now felt like crossing borders into hostile nation, where maintaining cover required constant vigilance about expressions, movements and communications that might reveal knowledge I was not supposed to possess. The business card had been in my wallet for 6 months, acquired during a professional networking event where Clarence Hartwell's reputation for aggressive corporate acquisitions had made him someone worth knowing rather than someone whose services I expected to require. His company specialized in identifying undervalued organizations with structural vulnerabilities that could be exploited for strategic advantage. Though his methods were reportedly surgical rather than destructive, dismantling competition through understanding rather than brute force attacks that damaged industries and eliminated employment unnecessarily. I made the call from my office after hours, when building security ensured privacy for conversations that required confidentiality from colleagues who might inadvertently reveal information to Samuel through casual workplace interactions. The telephone felt heavier than usual as I dialed numbers that would initiate processes leading to consequences I could not entirely predict or control. Though remaining passive while Samuel orchestrated my destruction seemed like accepting defeat without attempting strategic response. Clarence Hartwell. His voice carried authority earned through years of successful business negotiations and strategic victories, but also patience that suggested confidence in his capabilities rather than anxiety about proving superiority through aggressive displays of power or intimidation tactics that characterized less experienced corporate operators. Mr. Hartwell, this is Olivia Montgomery from Montgomery & Associates. We met at the Business Development Conference last spring. Olivia Montgomery. I was wondering when I might hear from you. The immediate recognition of my name suggested surveillance of Samuel's company that extended beyond casual market observation to detailed intelligence gathering about internal operations and personnel vulnerabilities that could be exploited for competitive advantage. His expectation of eventual contact from me implied understanding of psychological pressures that Samuel's management style created among senior staff, along with recognition that systematic exclusion of founding partners typically produced rebellion or defection that created opportunities for external intervention. I believe we should discuss certain business opportunities that might interest your organization. I assumed you might. Would you prefer to meet in person rather than discussing sensitive matters over telephone communications that could be monitored or recorded? His suggestion reflected professional caution appropriate for conversations involving potential corporate espionage or competitive intelligence sharing that could create legal complications if discovered by target organizations or regulatory authorities responsible for preventing anti-competitive business practices through coordinated market manipulation or unfair trade advantages. We arranged to meet the following evening at Meridian, an upscale downtown restaurant that provided public visibility, discouraging surveillance devices while maintaining sufficient privacy for sensitive discussions about corporate vulnerabilities and strategic intelligence that required confidential handling to protect both parties from potential legal exposure or professional retaliation. I arrived 15 minutes early, claiming a corner table that offered visual observation of other patrons while providing acoustic separation from conversations that might be overheard by individuals with connections to Samuel's business network or professional associations. The restaurant attracted corporate executives and legal professionals who conducted business discussions requiring discretion, creating ambient noise that would mask conversations involving sensitive topics or confidential information. Clarence entered precisely at the scheduled time, his punctuality demonstrating respect for appointments while suggesting operational efficiency that characterized successful business leaders who valued time as strategic resource rather than commodity that could be wasted through casual scheduling or inadequate preparation for important meetings. His appearance contradicted expectations based on his aggressive reputation for corporate acquisitions and competitive destruction of business opponents who challenged his organization's market expansion or strategic objectives. Rather than displaying bombastic personality requiring constant validation through demonstrations of power or authority, he projected quiet confidence that came from consistent victory earned through superior strategic thinking rather than intimidation tactics or financial resources alone. Before we discuss potential collaboration, Clarence said after ordering wine that suggested familiarity with quality rather than ostentation designed to impress business associates. I need to understand your motivations for seeking external intervention in what appears to be internal organizational conflict. His directness eliminated preliminary conversation that might waste time while avoiding clear discussion of sensitive topics requiring honest assessment of mutual interests and strategic objectives that would govern any potential business relationship between his organization and my willingness to provide competitive intelligence about Samuel's company operations. This is not about personal satisfaction or emotional revenge, I replied, choosing language that emphasized rational business decision-making rather than vindictive motivations that might suggest unreliable partnership or unpredictable behavior during complex acquisition processes requiring sustained collaboration over extended time frames. Revenge is an expensive luxury that rarely provides anticipated satisfaction while creating unforeseen complications for all parties involved in systematic corporate destruction, Clarence observed, his tone suggesting experience with clients whose emotional investment in outcomes had complicated strategic execution or produced suboptimal results that damaged professional relationships and market positions. My husband has systematically stolen my financial stake in companies we built together as equal partners. He intends to eliminate my ownership interest while retaining everything of value, leaving me without resources to provide for my daughter's education and future security. And your daughters represent your primary concern rather than personal grievances against your husband's treatment of your professional relationship or marriage? His inquiry revealed understanding that family responsibilities created different risk calculations than individual conflicts, requiring assurance that proposed actions would serve protective purposes rather than purely vindictive objectives that might produce disproportionate consequences affecting innocent parties including children who bore no responsibility for adult decisions involving business operations or marital relationships. My daughters deserve futures that do not depend on their father's continued goodwill or his willingness to honor financial obligations that could be modified according to his personal convenience or strategic business interests. Clarence studied my face for several moments, his assessment apparently confirming sincerity of motivations while evaluating potential risks associated with collaboration involving emotionally complicated family dynamics that could affect strategic decision-making during acquisition processes requiring sustained focus on business objectives rather than personal considerations. What specific intelligence can you provide about your husband's business operations, financial vulnerabilities, client relationships, and strategic weaknesses that would facilitate systematic acquisition of company assets while minimizing unnecessary disruption to profitable operations or valuable personnel? The question initiated negotiations that would transform my role from victim of Samuel's betrayal to strategic architect of comprehensive corporate destruction designed to protect my family's financial security through methods I had never previously considered morally acceptable but now recognized as necessary for survival in circumstances where traditional conflict resolution had been eliminated through Samuel's systematic deception and theft. The intelligence I provided to Clarence encompassed 5 years of intimate knowledge about Samuel's business operations, extending far beyond simple financial data to include psychological insights about decision-making patterns that would allow strategic manipulation of his responses to external pressures. I detailed which business divisions generated actual profit versus those maintained primarily for tax advantages, providing targeting information that would maximize acquisition efficiency while minimizing unnecessary expense or operational complexity during the takeover process. My understanding of seasonal cash flow patterns and the personal relationships that held key partnerships together represented intelligence unavailable through external market research, giving Clarence access to pressure points that could destabilize Samuel's entire business structure through coordinated attacks on vulnerable revenue streams during periods when financial reserves would be stretched thinnest. Most significantly, my insights into Samuel's pride and tendency to underestimate opposition created opportunities for psychological warfare that could force tactical errors leading to strategic collapse. His pattern of dismissing threats until they became overwhelming would work against him when facing sophisticated corporate acquisition strategies designed to appear coincidental rather than coordinated. Clarence's proposal required detailed intelligence and strategic guidance throughout the acquisition process, acknowledging that successful corporate destruction demanded ongoing collaboration rather than simple information transfer followed by independent action. The finder's fee of $800,000 plus a senior executive position represented financial security exceeding anything I had achieved during my partnership with Samuel, transforming my family's economic prospects while providing professional advancement beyond what traditional divorce proceedings might secure. His warning that Samuel would lose everything associated with the company forced me to confront the comprehensive nature of the revenge I was contemplating. Reputation, financial standing, professional relationships would all be eliminated through systematic business collapse rather than simple competitive defeat or temporary setback that might allow eventual recovery. Are you prepared for those consequences? Clarence asked, his tone suggesting experience with clients whose emotional investment in outcomes had complicated strategic execution through second thoughts or moral qualms that emerged during implementation phases. I am prepared for my daughters to have a future that does not depend on their father's continued goodwill. The contract signing occurred that night, transforming my role from victim seeking fair treatment to strategic architect of total corporate annihilation. The legal documents established parameters for collaboration that crossed moral boundaries I had never previously considered while justifying these actions through concern for my daughter's future security and independence from Samuel's manipulative control over family resources. The campaign began the following Monday with elegant sophistication that showcased corporate warfare at its most refined level. Clarence's approach leveraged Samuel's own aggressive expansion strategy to create vulnerabilities that could be exploited with surgical precision rather than obvious external attack that might generate sympathy or legal protection for the target organization. Samuel had financed growth through a complex web of leveraged agreements and client advances that remained profitable as long as cash flow maintained steady patterns, but created dangerous exposure to any disruption in the payment cycle that might cascade through interconnected financial obligations. This structure represented exactly the kind of strategic overextension that Clarence's organization specialized in identifying and exploiting for competitive advantage. The identification of 3 major clients with early termination clauses required intelligence about contract specifics that only internal company knowledge could provide, demonstrating the value of my collaboration while maintaining plausible deniability about the source of Clarence's strategic insights. Morrison Industries, Henderson Group, and Pacific Consulting each maintained contracts containing exit mechanisms that could be triggered through legitimate business concerns rather than coordinated sabotage that might create legal exposure. The timing coordination necessary to activate simultaneous contract terminations revealed planning sophistication that transformed individual client dissatisfaction into systematic business collapse through strategic orchestration rather than coincidental market forces that might be explained through general economic conditions or industry-wide trends affecting consulting service demand. Morrison Industries terminated their annual consulting contract on Tuesday morning, citing concerns about service quality that reflected legitimate frustrations with Samuel's increasingly erratic management style and his delegation of account oversight to Rebecca despite her limited experience with complex client relationships requiring institutional knowledge and strategic continuity. Henderson Group followed on Thursday with contract cancellation that referenced their need for fresh strategic perspective that could not be provided by existing consulting arrangements. Though the real motivation involved Clarence's careful cultivation of relationships within their executive leadership team through social connections and professional networking that had created receptivity to alternative service providers. Pacific Consulting completed the coordinated withdrawal on Friday, eliminating 3 major revenue streams within a single week while maintaining the appearance of independent business decisions rather than orchestrated attack on Samuel's financial foundation. The timing created maximum psychological impact while establishing cash flow disruption that would force immediate crisis management responses. Samuel's initial reaction followed predictable patterns that confirmed my psychological assessment of his character and strategic thinking capabilities. Rather than analyzing actual vulnerabilities that had made coordinated client departures possible, he immediately blamed me despite my complete lack of access to client relationships or company operations since the conference room confrontation. "You orchestrated this," he accused during a phone call that evening, his voice carrying paranoia that accompanied systematic deception and projecting his own capacity for manipulation onto others while missing actual threats to his business stability. Rebecca's enthusiastic support for theories about my sabotage revealed her investment in maintaining Samuel's focus on imaginary enemies rather than addressing real vulnerabilities that their management decisions had created within the company structure. Her ability to redirect his attention away from their operational failures toward conspiracy theories about my supposed influence over client relationships served Clarence's strategic purposes by preventing rational analysis of the business collapse that was accelerating beyond original timeline expectations. The escalation from accusations of betrayal to increasingly desperate attempts to retain remaining clients through unprofitable concessions illustrated how psychological pressure could force tactical errors that compounded strategic problems. Samuel began offering service rates below cost structure requirements, creating additional financial strain that transformed temporary revenue disruption into permanent structural damage threatening organizational survival. Marcus provided intelligence updates through carefully coded telephone conversations that reflected his understanding of surveillance risks associated with revealing information about Samuel's deteriorating mental state and desperate business decisions. His reports about 18-hour workdays and sleeping in the office revealed psychological breakdown accompanying business failure, suggesting that personal stress would generate additional tactical errors accelerating the timeline for complete organizational collapse. The observation that Rebecca had stopped attending client meetings indicated her recognition that association with failing leadership could damage her professional reputation, creating opportunities for intelligence gathering as she distanced herself from Samuel's increasingly erratic decision-making while positioning herself for career advancement through alternative employment opportunities that would not be affected by his business failure. Samuel's attempts to personally manage every client relationship simultaneously demonstrated the operational chaos that accompanied desperate leadership during systematic business failure, creating additional vulnerabilities that Clarence's organization could exploit through targeted recruitment of key personnel and strategic acquisition of specific business relationships that retained value despite overall organizational collapse. The campaign's mathematical precision transformed individual business relationships into coordinated weapons for systematic destruction, revealing how internal knowledge of customer service failures and unmet expectations could be weaponized for strategic advantage through careful timing and external pressure applied through Clarence's extensive professional network and competitive intelligence capabilities. By the end of the second week, Samuel had borrowed against company assets to maintain cash flow during client departures, putting the entire organization at risk through financial decisions that reflected desperation rather than strategic thinking. The structural damage would threaten organizational survival regardless of whether departed clients eventually returned, ensuring that temporary disruption would produce permanent consequences that served Clarence's acquisition objectives while providing the comprehensive destruction I required to protect my family's future independence from Samuel's manipulative control. The third week of Clarence's systematic campaign brought changes to our household that I struggled to conceal from Carol and Teresa. My late-night phone calls with intelligence updates and strategic planning sessions required careful timing to avoid detection by daughters whose sleep schedules had become increasingly irregular as family tension created anxiety that manifested in restless nights and early morning wandering through our house. Carol's analytical mind began detecting inconsistencies in my explanations for meetings that extended past normal business hours and phone conversations conducted in hushed tones from rooms where privacy could be maintained. Her 17-year-old understanding of adult behavior patterns allowed her to recognize that my activities had shifted beyond routine work responsibilities to something requiring secrecy that contradicted the transparency I had always emphasized as fundamental to family relationships. "Mom, why are you whispering when you talk to clients?" she asked one morning while preparing breakfast, her direct question carrying the weight of accumulated observations rather than casual curiosity about my professional activities. The question forced me to confront the growing distance my collaboration with Clarence was creating between my daughters and me precisely when family unity would become most critical for navigating divorce proceedings and custody arrangements that would follow Samuel's business collapse. The necessity of protecting them from adult complexities involving strategic deception and corporate warfare required emotional barriers that felt like betrayal of maternal instincts demanding honesty and shared trust during family crisis. "Some business discussions require confidentiality to protect client interests," I replied, the half-truth tasting bitter as it left my mouth. Carol's expression suggested skepticism that reflected her growing awareness that adult explanations often concealed rather than clarified situations that directly affected her life and future security. Her retreat to silence indicated not acceptance but strategic withdrawal from conversations that would not produce truthful answers regardless of her persistence or emotional investment in understanding family dynamics that were reshaping her world without her knowledge or consent. Teresa's response to household tension manifested differently, through increasing withdrawal from family activities that had previously provided structure and connection during difficult periods. Her 14-year-old intuition detected approaching changes without possessing context for interpreting the emotional undercurrents that accompanied strategic planning sessions and covert intelligence gathering operations that occupied my attention during hours formerly devoted to homework supervision and casual conversation about school friendships and soccer achievements. She began spending more time in her room with headphones and homework that served as legitimate excuses for avoiding family interactions that felt unpredictable and emotionally dangerous. Her requests for permission to stay late at friends' houses increased as our home environment became less comfortable than social situations that provided normalcy unavailable within our increasingly tense domestic atmosphere. The irony that protecting my daughter's financial future required emotional distance from them during the campaign created internal conflict about whether strategic thinking truly served family interests or undermined the relationships I claimed to be defending through my alliance with Clarence. The calculated deception necessary for successful corporate warfare conflicted with maternal values emphasizing authentic communication and shared decision-making that had governed our family relationships during happier periods before Samuel's betrayal had necessitated strategic response beyond traditional conflict resolution methods. My psychological transformation during these weeks felt both necessary and disturbing, requiring capabilities I had never known I possessed while challenging fundamental assumptions about my character and moral boundaries. Late-night planning sessions with detailed client analysis and vulnerability assessment resembled military campaigns rather than business negotiations, forcing acknowledgement that I could coldly calculate human costs when my family's security faced genuine threats requiring decisive action. The satisfaction I experienced watching Samuel's growing desperation through Marcus's intelligence reports conflicted with moral training that had emphasized compromise and conflict resolution over total victory achieved through systematic deception and strategic manipulation. The woman who had once believed that fairness and direct communication could resolve any conflict was becoming someone capable of orchestrating another person's complete professional and financial annihilation without experiencing guilt proportionate to the destruction being systematically implemented. Samuel's deteriorating mental state became visible through changes in his physical appearance and behavior patterns that affected his interactions with Carol and Teresa in ways that complicated my strategic objectives while providing additional justification for protective actions designed to eliminate his influence over our family's future security and emotional stability. His increasing paranoia about employee loyalty and business competitors manifested in late-night phone calls to staff members demanding reassurance about their commitment to company success and personal loyalty to his leadership during what he characterized as temporary market difficulties requiring unified response to external pressures threatening organizational survival. Weight loss and persistent fatigue created visible evidence of psychological pressure accompanying systematic business failure, while a tremor in his hands during family meals suggested stress levels that were affecting his physical coordination and emotional regulation. The contrast between confident public statements about temporary business adjustments and private anxiety about mounting financial pressures created cognitive dissonance that influenced his parenting behavior in ways that further damaged relationships with daughters who required stability rather than erratic attention spans and broken promises about family activities. His attempts to maintain normal father relationships while managing business crisis resulted in distracted conversations and canceled commitments that reinforced Carol and Teresa's growing perception of him as unreliable rather than simply busy with legitimate work responsibilities. Their emotional withdrawal from interactions with him served my strategic purposes by reducing complications that might arise from their loyalty or sympathy interfering with custody arrangements that would need to prioritize their long-term welfare over temporary disruption caused by divorce proceedings. Rebecca's strategic withdrawal added unexpected complications to the campaign timeline while providing additional intelligence about the comprehensive nature of betrayals that extended beyond Samuel's treatment of me to encompass systematic deception affecting multiple relationships and professional obligations. Her reduced presence at company meetings and social events suggested recognition that association with failing leadership could damage her professional reputation, leading to positioning for alternative career opportunities that would not be affected by organizational collapse. Marcus reported that Rebecca had begun systematically removing personal items from her office while canceling joint client presentations that would have required her continued association with Samuel's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain business relationships through personal appeals and financial concessions that eliminated profitability margins necessary for organizational sustainability. The discovery that Rebecca had been networking with competing firms while maintaining her position as Samuel's assistant revealed strategic planning capabilities that matched my own collaboration with Clarence, creating parallel betrayals that compounded Samuel's business and personal isolation while raising questions about whether her original manipulation had served individual career advancement or represented coordination with external forces seeking to acquire or destroy our company through systematic internal sabotage. This development forced reconsideration of Rebecca's motivations and timeline for involvement in Samuel's systematic theft of my ownership interests and financial assets. If her actions represented independent opportunism rather than collaboration with Clarence's organization, then Samuel was facing coordinated attacks from multiple sources without understanding the scope of threats to his business empire and personal relationships. The possibility that Rebecca possessed her own strategic agenda independent of both Samuel's objectives and my alliance with Clarence created unpredictable variables that could affect the campaign's outcome in ways that might not serve my family's interests or provide the comprehensive protection I required to ensure Carol and Teresa's future independence from their father's manipulative control over financial resources and emotional relationships. The uncertainty about Rebecca's true motivations haunted my thoughts as I prepared for what I sensed would be the final phase of the campaign. Clarence had indicated that Samuel's financial position was becoming untenable, with creditors beginning to question loan collateral and remaining clients expressing concerns about service continuity. The systematic pressure was working exactly as planned, yet Rebecca's independent maneuvering suggested complications that could affect the outcome in unpredictable ways. I was standing in our kitchen at 11:30 on Friday night, waiting for chamomile tea to steep when my phone rang. The domestic normalcy of the moment felt surreal as Samuel's name appeared on the caller identification. His voice, when I answered, sounded nothing like the confident businessman who had humiliated me in front of 23 employees just 3 weeks earlier. "What do you want, Olivia?" The hoarse, defeated tone carried exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue to encompass the psychological drain of fighting battles on multiple fronts without understanding the scope of forces arrayed against him. His opening question acknowledged, perhaps for the first time, that his business collapse resulted from deliberate action rather than coincidental market forces or random client dissatisfaction. "I want you to acknowledge what you have done." The silence that stretched between us through the phone connection felt dense with 5 years of accumulated resentment, betrayal, and strategic deception that had undermined our marriage while I remained oblivious to the systematic theft occurring beneath the surface of our professional partnership. The kitchen around me seemed to shrink during those moments, the familiar surroundings providing strange comfort while I engaged in the most crucial conversation of our relationship. "What I have done." His laugh carried bitterness that revealed psychological defense mechanisms struggling to maintain self-image despite mounting evidence of personal responsibility for his current circumstances. "You destroyed my company. You destroyed everything I built. You destroyed it yourself, Samuel. I simply accelerated the process." The accusation forced him to confront logical consequences of decisions he had made without considering how systematic exclusion of founding partners might eventually produce strategic retaliation. His treatment of me as expendable employee rather than equal contributor to shared success had created vulnerabilities that Clarence's organization could exploit through methods that appeared legitimate while serving justice that traditional legal remedies might never have provided. "I know about the Henderson account transfer. I know about the shell companies. I know about every salary reduction that coincided with increases in your personal compensation." My enumeration of his deceptions eliminated any possibility of continued denial or rationalization about legitimate business necessity driving recent organizational changes. The evidence I had accumulated through Marcus's assistance and my own investigation created an undeniable record of systematic theft disguised as market-responsive management decisions. "The girls," Samuel said after another long pause, his voice carrying desperation that acknowledged how completely his strategic position had collapsed. "What about Carol and Teresa?" His invocation of our daughters revealed belated recognition that his actions had consequences extending beyond immediate business relationships to encompass family stability and parental responsibilities he had been ignoring during his pursuit of individual advantages at my expense and their long-term detriment. The girls will be fine. They will have a mother who can provide for their future without depending on your goodwill or continued cooperation. My response emphasized the fundamental difference in our approaches to parental responsibility. His assumption that providing basic support constituted adequate fatherhood contrasted sharply with my determination to ensure Carol and Teresa possessed independence that would not require maintaining relationships with unreliable authority figures whose support might be withdrawn according to personal convenience or strategic considerations. You have always been selfish, Olivia. Always putting your own interests above the family. The accusation might have wounded me during earlier phases of our relationship, but now it simply confirmed how completely Samuel had rewritten our marriage history to justify behaviors that objectively constituted emotional abuse and financial theft. In his revised narrative, my desire for fair compensation represented selfishness while his systematic theft served family interests. My expectation of basic respect became unreasonable demand while his public humiliation demonstrated necessary leadership during challenging business conditions. Monday morning, divorce papers will be filed. I suggest you retain legal counsel. The statement represented the final step in comprehensive strategy that had begun with Clarence's alliance but encompassed legal, financial, and custody arrangements designed to maximize my daughter's security while minimizing Samuel's ability to use parental access as leverage for continued manipulation or financial control over family resources and decision-making processes. With what money? His question exposed the complete nature of financial collapse that had resulted from Clarence's systematic campaign combined with Samuel's own desperate attempts to maintain business operations through borrowing against company assets and accepting unprofitable client relationships that eliminated revenue margins necessary for organizational sustainability. That is no longer my concern. The finality in my voice reflected transformation from someone who had once felt responsible for Samuel's emotional welfare and professional success to strategic architect who had orchestrated his comprehensive destruction while maintaining legal and moral justification for actions that served protective purposes rather than purely vindictive objectives. I ended the call and remained standing in our kitchen, listening to rain against windows that created atmospheric backdrop for the dissolution of our marriage and business partnership. The sound seemed to wash away pretense that had maintained our relationship long after genuine emotional connection had disappeared, replaced by Samuel's systematic deception and my growing awareness that survival required strategic response rather than continued trust in fairness or communication. The transformation from victim to victor through careful alliance building and intelligence coordination felt less triumphant than I had anticipated during months of strategic planning and systematic revenge implementation. The quietness that accompanied total victory carried strange emptiness rather than satisfaction or celebration, perhaps because complete destruction of another person's life and livelihood created moral weight that strategic justification could not entirely eliminate. The promise of Monday's new position with Clarence's organization and dramatically improved financial circumstances for Carol and Teresa provided concrete benefits that justified emotional costs of orchestrating Samuel's complete professional and personal annihilation. The $800,000 finder's fee plus senior executive salary would transform our family's economic prospects while ensuring independence from Samuel's potential future manipulation or control over resources affecting our daughter's education and opportunities. Yet questions remained about lessons Carol and Teresa would learn from observing their mother's capacity for systematic destruction of their father's career and financial standing. The protective motivations underlying my strategic alliance with Clarence served their long-term interests, but the methods employed might produce educational outcomes inconsistent with values I wanted to transmit about conflict resolution, personal relationships, and moral decision-making under extreme pressure. The kitchen felt different after ending that conversation, as if the physical space had been transformed by the finality of decisions that could not be reversed or modified through negotiation or compromise. The domestic environment where we had shared thousands of meals and conversations during 15 years of marriage now served as the location where I had delivered strategic checkmate that would eliminate Samuel's influence over our family's future while providing security that traditional divorce proceedings might never have achieved. The rain continued against the windows, creating rhythmic soundtrack for internal processing of victory that felt simultaneously necessary and troubling. The woman who had once believed that fairness and direct communication could resolve any conflict had become someone capable of orchestrating another person's complete destruction through systematic deception and strategic manipulation, crossing moral boundaries that previous versions of myself would have considered unacceptable regardless of provocation or justification. The rain stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming under morning sunlight that felt like a fresh beginning. I dressed carefully for my first day at Clarence's organization, choosing a navy suit that projected authority while maintaining the professional competence that had impressed him during our initial negotiations. The woman in the mirror looked different from the one who had endured public humiliation just 4 weeks earlier, transformed by strategic victory into someone who commanded respect rather than accepting dismissal. Clarence's downtown headquarters occupied 30 floors of a glass tower that reflected the city's business district with architectural elegance that spoke to sustained success rather than temporary achievement. The executive parking space assigned to me carried my name on a brass nameplate that represented tangible recognition of professional value after years of systematic devaluation designed to undermine my confidence and strategic capabilities. The corner office exceeded anything I had possessed during my partnership with Samuel, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that provided panoramic views of the financial district where major decisions affected thousands of careers and millions of dollars in economic activity. The furnishings reflected contemporary design principles that emphasized functionality without sacrificing aesthetic appeal, creating an environment conducive to strategic thinking and client relationship management that would utilize skills Samuel had claimed I lacked. My new colleagues treated me with deference that acknowledged strategic intelligence and business expertise rather than viewing me as expendable overhead to be eliminated when convenient for management objectives or personal advancement. The orientation process introduced me to acquisition specialists and market analysts who recognized my contributions to successful corporate campaigns and understood the value of insider knowledge about target organizations and competitive vulnerabilities. The irony that my salary now exceeded Samuel's peak earnings during our marriage created satisfaction tempered by recognition that financial success achieved through orchestrating another person's destruction carried different emotional weight than advancement earned through traditional professional merit and collaborative achievement. The 6-figure compensation package provided security that transformed my daughter's educational prospects while demonstrating capabilities that had been systematically suppressed rather than objectively evaluated during our business partnership. Carol adapted to our changed circumstances with analytical pragmatism that reflected her intellectual maturity and understanding that major family transitions required strategic thinking rather than emotional resistance to inevitable adjustments affecting living arrangements and financial planning. Her acceptance to the prestigious summer program that Samuel had claimed we could not afford became financially feasible through improved resources that would provide educational opportunities matching her academic achievements regardless of family conflicts or divorce proceedings. "Mom, this feels different," she observed during our first week in the new neighborhood, her 17-year-old perspective recognizing stability that contrasted with months of tension and uncertainty that had characterized our household dynamics while Samuel's systematic betrayal had been developing beyond my awareness or understanding. Teresa's soccer team advancement to regional championships received enthusiastic support that demonstrated how improved financial circumstances allowed greater attention to individual accomplishments and personal interests that deserved celebration rather than distracted acknowledgement between business crises and marital conflicts requiring emergency management and damage control efforts. Both girls demonstrated resilience that suggested they understood these changes represented permanent improvement rather than temporary upheaval that might be reversed through reconciliation or compromise that would restore previous living arrangements without addressing underlying problems that had created chronic family tension and emotional instability affecting their academic performance and social development. However, their questions about Samuel's absence from family activities required careful responses that acknowledged their father's choices without completely destroying their relationship with him through detailed explanations about systematic theft and emotional abuse that would create psychological damage exceeding benefits of complete transparency about adult conflicts involving corporate espionage and strategic retaliation. Marcus provided periodic updates about Samuel's gradual attempts to rebuild professional reputation through consulting work and small business ventures that utilized experience gained during our partnership while acknowledging industry reputation damage caused by his company's collapse and employee treatment patterns that had become known throughout the professional community where character mattered as much as technical competence. For securing client trust and project opportunities. Rebecca's successful transition to a senior position with a competing firm demonstrated that strategic career planning and MBA credentials provided opportunities that remained available despite association with failed leadership and organizational collapse that had eliminated her previous professional relationships and networking connections within Samuel's business environment. The dispersion of our former employees to various opportunities eliminated the workplace community that had once provided professional identity and social connections, forcing everyone to rebuild career relationships and business networks independent of shared organizational history that could no longer serve as foundation for future advancement or collaborative projects requiring mutual trust and strategic coordination. Samuel's financial recovery would require years of credit rehabilitation and reputation building that might never fully restore his previous professional standing within industry circles where his treatment of founding partners and systematic deception had become cautionary tales about ethical boundaries and long-term consequences of prioritizing individual advancement over collaborative relationships and organizational integrity. The moral implications of my strategic alliance with Clarence continued generating internal conflict despite concrete benefits the campaign had provided for Carol and Teresa's education, housing and future opportunities that would serve their long-term interests regardless of temporary disruption caused by family dissolution and custody arrangements requiring legal formalization and financial planning. The efficiency with which I had adapted to coordinating corporate espionage and systematic business destruction suggested psychological capabilities I had never recognized within myself, creating uncertainty about moral boundaries I might cross if future circumstances threatened my family's security or professional interests requiring strategic response beyond traditional negotiation and compromise through communication and mutual understanding. The satisfaction of achieving financial independence and professional advancement through strategic thinking rather than conventional career development demonstrated personal strength while highlighting how completely I had abandoned earlier beliefs about fairness and conflict resolution through honest discussion and collaborative problem-solving that assumed good faith participation from all parties involved in relationship challenges. The foundation of what we were becoming included knowledge about my capacity for comprehensive revenge that would influence all future relationships and conflicts requiring assessment of strategic options versus emotional responses to perceived threats or professional challenges that might affect family welfare or personal advancement within competitive business environments. The city beyond my office windows continued its daily rhythm of commerce and ambition. Indifferent to individual stories of betrayal and retaliation that had reshaped 3 lives while providing lessons about power, deception, and consequences that would inform decision-making processes for decades ahead. The rain that had washed away traces of what we had been left clean foundations for whatever we would choose to build from the dissolution of trust that had once seemed permanent but proved as fragile as the marriage vows and business partnerships that had been systematically dismantled through strategic intelligence and coordinated pressure designed to protect rather than destroy, though the distinction between those objectives had become less clear with each tactical victory in a campaign that had succeeded beyond original expectations while raising questions about proportionality and moral boundaries that would require ongoing evaluation as normal life resumed. If this story of strategic revenge kept you engaged throughout Olivia's transformation, please show your support by liking this content right now. The most compelling moment for me was when Olivia overheard Samuel and Rebecca's conversation in the hallway, revealing the systematic nature of their betrayal. Which scene resonated most strongly with your own sense of justice? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. To access more complex stories exploring themes of corporate betrayal, strategic thinking, and family protection, subscribe to our channel and activate notification preferences to receive immediate updates when new content becomes available.